Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm EP529. The USS Savannah docked at Cambodia's Sihanoukville port for 5 days in the middle of December, the first US military vessel to visit in 8 years. Sihanoukville port is just 30 kilometers from the controversial Chinese-renovated Ream Naval Base, where 2 Chinese corvettes have been stationed for about a year. Despite Cambodians' denials, it is an overseas Chinese naval base. Here's US Indo-Pacific Commander Admiral Samuel Paparo on Ream.
So we're taking a wait-and-see attitude for Ream itself. And when the time comes, we would like to perhaps make a port visit to Ream as we learn more about the People's Republic of China's activities there, which are yet to be determined. And we have great respect for Cambodia as it embarks upon this path.
What does the US port call mean for US-Cambodia ties, and what impact could these developments have on China and any South China Sea contingency? Joining us today are Alex Tan, University of Canterbury, New Zealand, Professor of Political Science and International Relations, and National Zhengzhou University Chair Professor of Political Science. He's also Institute for Indo-Pacific Affairs founder and Principal Research Fellow. Also joining us is Ronan Fu, Academia Sinica Institute of Political Science Assistant Research Fellow. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show today.
Thank you.
Cambodia's Navy welcomed 103 officers from the US Navy's USS Savannah littoral combat ship in the southern port of Sihanoukville on December 16th. Cambodia's Ministry of Defense said the purpose of the US visit was to strengthen and develop friendship and to promote bilateral cooperation between Cambodia and the US. Earlier, Admiral Samuel Paparo stressed, with regard to our visit and our activities with Cambodia, they are not to counter anyone. The port call follows on from US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin's June 2024 visit, the first ever by US Defense Secretary specifically to hold a bilateral meeting with his counterpart, Defense Minister Tay Sea. That visit came 6 years after Cambodia cancelled joint exercises with the US military in 2017. So let me come to you first, Alex. Admiral Paparo said that since 2007, 27 US ships have stopped in Cambodia, but this was the very first actual port visit, actual docking in 8 years. So how important was this visit and why now?
That's a very good question. I think it is a very, very significant visit considering the lapse of 8 years. But the choice of Cambodia is actually quite interesting, considering how close it is with China. But I think there are a couple of reasons that we can think of that are possible reasons why the United States Navy decide to visit Cambodia today. Firstly, it could be considered part of what is called defense diplomacy, wherein the US Navy and navies of other countries do move around and visit. And what's the purpose of that? Trust building, confidence building measure, right? A second visit also is to kind of signal to Cambodia the United States Navy and the United States is willing to work with Cambodia, that they're coming here with an open palm, a hand to shake, then maybe some ties could be developed in the future. Thirdly, we can probably say also is that the United States saying that, hey, we're here. We are here in the region, we're here to stay, we're happy to work with you, but we're also kind of watching the region as well. Because we are an interested party in the Indo-Pacific region and in South China Sea.
So in terms of trust building, Ronan, do you think there's any significance in the US failing to dock at Ream Naval Base itself?
Yeah, I don't think that should be considered as a failure. I think that basically the decision is made upon some calculative motivation, reasoning. So number one is that, so basically the Ream was founded, and you can say that largely was built by, Chinese corporations, right? So number one, you don't know whether the use of Ream will come with some conditions, number one. Number two, whether the use of that will be under, some souvenirs, under Chinese watch, right? So it comes with some possible grave implication for the US Navy. So that's the reason why, even though, the general has shown, some previous keenness to use the dock, but now I think they changed the course. Yeah.
Alex, would you agree with that?
Yeah,
Consequences for the US Navy or for the Chinese Navy?
Well, I think it's both ways, right? So there's definitely a calculation going on there within the United States military part, right? So do you show your hand this very early? Do you not, right? And then the other part of it is, if I go to Sihanoukville as opposed to going to Ream right now, then I'm actually signaling, this is for cooperation, I'm showing my hand, right? And we'll wait and see, how you progress on whether China became the sole exclusive access Navy there, or are you really open? We'll test you later. But for now, let's do the defense diplomacy thing.
Okay. So, Alex, let me ask you, do you feel that there is a strategic push on the US side to improve relations, which essentially perhaps started with that, again, a historic visit by US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin when he visited 6 months ago? That followed the resumption of the $18 million in US aid to Cambodia.
Yeah, I think definitely yes. What the US is trying to signal here is, don't doubt us that we are an interested party in this region, that we will be engaged. We are not going to withdraw from the world. We're not going to withdraw from this area. Yes, there are lots of hotspots in the world, but that it is in the United States' national interest to be in the Indo-Pacific region, to be in the South China Sea, to be in Southeast Asia. So I think it's a signaling mechanism because, as you know, there have been doubts, right? I mean, people doubt whether the United States has continuing attention on the region, but this is a signal that, no, we're not going to change. We are here to stay.
So very briefly, Ronan, in that case, is sort of a growing or expanding, a warming US-Cambodia relationship, is that at the expense of perhaps Cambodian democracy? Because we talked about the $18 million in aid, which had been frozen, suspended. That was because of the assessment by the US of perhaps unfairness in the Cambodian elections in 2023. And that was specifically because of how the government treated opposition activists, especially those related to the disbanded Cambodian National Rescue Party.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that, the event that you just mentioned, those, lingering, human rights or democratic backslide issues will be like a possible obstacle going forward in terms of, building close ties between between the U.S. and Cambodia. But I do think that, here right now, the strategic consideration seems to outweigh, the concerns over some democratic or human rights issues. And I would like to actually, echo what Professor Tan just mentioned, that, the timing. Right now, we are going to embrace an incoming, President Trump, right? So as a person who brings a lot of uncertainty, and it's not just uncertainty, brought about, onto the United States. It's also the uncertainty brought about onto Asia Pacific, including Cambodia and some Southeast Asian countries, right? So the timing is very key, to show that by engaging in defense diplomacy, we're reassure you that even with a new president, we'll still be here. We'll still consider this region as key core interests of the United States.
Yeah, and perhaps that visit by the US Nimitz-class aircraft carrier to Malaysia, first time in 12 years, reinforces that particular point. Now, the Pentagon's 2024 US report on military and security developments involving the PRC lists Ream Naval Base as a, quote, potential Chinese military facility with, quote, PLA persistent access. The report states that in June 2022, the PRC in Cambodia hosted a ceremony to mark the start of work on PRC-built upgrades of Ream. At the same time, a PRC official confirmed that the PLAs would have access to parts of the base. Now, in December 2023, Chinese naval ships became the first vessels to make a port call to Ream, with near continual presence of 2 Chinese corvettes since that time. In May 2024, Cambodia and China held their largest ever joint military exercises. Alex, let me ask you, so the US believes that Ream Naval Base is strategic for China. However, there are analysts that perhaps take issue with that position. What's your assessment?
There was a Lowy Institute research about that, and they questioned a little bit about how critical is the Ream Naval Base for China. I think I concur with that assessment. If you look at the location itself, it's a bit more inland rather than has a direct access to South China Sea. There is Malaysia on one side, there's Vietnam on the other side. I think it is important as a military asset, but I'm not sure it is critical, particularly for China, because it really goes both ways. Now, China can use it for intelligence gathering, but Vietnam can too. So there is, like all bases, like all military assets, it's important, but I'm not sure it is that critical, particularly in a situation more north of the South China Sea, for example, in the Taiwan contingency. I think it is much more limited use. If it is, it's much more southern part of the South China Sea because of the location itself.
So perhaps it more focuses, or it's more of a threat to Vietnam's claims in the South China Sea.
Yes, and stretching all to South Malaysia and stretching down to the Natuna Islands where Indonesia is. That is, I think, more significant.
Right. Okay. So, Ronan, what's your assessment?
Yeah, I think I largely agree with Professor Tan, and I would like to delve down and emphasize that basically the advantage lies in proximity. Proximity to shipping lanes and its potential role as a forward operation base. But I fully agree with Professor Tan that in terms of military uses, it's quite limited. It's close to useless.
Is it just the location, though? Because we're kind of saying that the location does matter to the southern claimants, but then we're also saying that perhaps because you've got to come around the peninsula, that it's not a direct access. How about intelligence gathering? Because that Lowy report basically concluded that they believe it's more useful as a base for intelligence gathering. What might that intelligence gathering be, Ronan? In what scenario would it be used?
Yeah, so I think I agree with the Lowy assessment. Basically, like Professor Tan and I mentioned, that in terms of military use, it should be clear that it's limited use, right? But in terms of intelligence gathering, I think it has a great potential, right? So basically, what you can do using this, it can serve the purpose in twofold. Number one, right? So like I mentioned, that you can serve as like a forward operation base, right? So that by engaging in such exercises, you get to understand what might be going on going forward, right? So you can engage in that, and you can sort of collect some intelligence, right? Number two, even if that's gonna cause some concern on the Vietnamese side, right? Some other countries might actually use this as an opportunity for future cooperation, right? So maybe there'll be some exchange of intelligence going on, but that is up in the air. That's my conclusion.
Alex, Beijing responded to the U.S. warship's visit by saying this: such exchanges and collaborations in security and defense should contribute to promoting regional peace and stability rather than the opposite. Do you think that they are concerned about growing U.S. influence and presence, as you said, in Cambodia, potentially in Ream?
I would be surprised if they're not, right? Because you now have another power there in a country that's supposed to be a really good ally of them. But you can see that what the United States is trying to do, right? It's also trying to test how strong is your alliance, right? If we offer you this, if we do this with you, if we have these cooperation, are you still really going to stick with your buddy, so to speak? Of course, China will be. It's a very diplomatic statement, right? I mean, what the Chinese spokesperson said, very, very diplomatic. Nothing controversial, but statements like that signal that I'm actually very concerned without showing that I'm not concerned.
Now, while the father of current Prime Minister Hun Manet, Hun Sen, describes the China friendship as ironclad and China as Cambodia's most trusted friend, Hun didn't always feel that way. Back in the 1980s, Hun declared China, quote, the root of all that is evil in Cambodia. This was a result of Chinese support for Pol Pot and his brutal Khmer Rouge regime installed in 1975. Pol Pot was eventually defeated in 1979 by liberators including Hun Sen, who was supported by Vietnam, but only after the Khmer Rouge's killing fields had taken the lives of at least an estimated 2 million Cambodians. However, Hun Sen's allegiances switched following Cambodia's first UN-sponsored general election in 1993. In 1997, he launched a bloody coup to overthrow the Prime Minister, Norodom Ranariddh. In the year 2000, with mounting condemnation from the West, China stepped in with substantial aid packages, enabling Hun Sen's dramatic shift towards Beijing, which has remained in place to this day. Ronan, so does any of that history help us to explain why Cambodia seems to be an exception to the trend across Southeast Asia, which is usually that they will hedge between the US and China? So they will look to engage China economically and the US in terms of security. Anything in Cambodia's past that explains that?
Yeah, so basically what happened in 1997 actually spanned a lot. The start of US military aid in terms of providing arms supplies, training programs, and financial support for defense modernization. And remember that, deep in the mind of Cambodian national leaders, they consider, two countries that pose significant national threat to land, and one being, Vietnam, right? So basically, the reason why, most of the Southeast Asian countries, they are hedging, but Cambodia wasn't. And the reason for that was, number one, the ties with the US was being cut off after 1997. So that's the reason why China was able to can in. Number two, China usually provides supplies and training programs with no strings attached. So that's the reason why you see Cambodia embrace Chinese influence and basically trying to get what they need in terms of national security and economic assistance solely from China.
So strings being democracy and focus on human rights.
That's right.
Yeah, Alex, what do we understand to be Cambodia's biggest security threats? What does it perceive?
There are several, because in the past, earlier ones were, if everybody will remember, Vietnamese invasion. Yeah. So that the threat is there. And then they still have these occasional border flashes with Thailand. Yeah. But in reality, over the last many years now, I think the key issues for Cambodia's threat is actually transnational threats that are going through their very, very porous borders. For example, illicit drug trade and what have you, right? So because the military itself is quite weak, they're not able to patrol that. So I would say that, rather than the Vietnam threat or the Thailand threat, it's more these type of activities.
So you wouldn't actually set much store by the OCA, which is the overlapping claims area that is being fought over by Cambodia and Thailand, 27,000 square kilometers of the Gulf of Thailand, essentially, which is rich in oil and gas. Yeah.
Well, there is this issue that they will have to deal with, but I don't see Cambodia and Thailand, going
into conflict,
military confrontation.
Right. But would it need the military modernization to deal with to sort of deter Thailand?
Yes, of course. But we have to also remember one interesting thing about the Thai military as well. China is also supplying them as well. So it's supplying both ways, and so it's a very interesting situation there, right? But I don't think that a direct military confrontation is in the offing, so to speak, because significantly you have a much, much weaker Cambodia. And it will take a long time before Cambodia reaches to the level of the Thai military as such. So,
do you, Rona, maybe I'll ask you. So, do you think this is now the time for Cambodia to essentially to diversify its security partner, not to rely solely on China, which it has been doing? 93% of its, arms imports are from from China. Do you sense that there is a push perhaps on the Cambodian side that it wants to repair relations with the US and it's open to security partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have seen, some diversifying effort being made by the Cambodian leadership. For example, in 2022, they actually, co-sponsor a UN resolution condemning, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? And we see the US docking, just recently. So, and I think President Tan is absolutely correct in saying that, the strategic environment facing Cambodia is actually multifaceted. They don't want to put all their security eggs on the same basket. So in the future, you can see more and more Cambodian hedging in the making. And we are going to see, some trying to inviting more forces, being putting in the same room. But the tricky part is that, for example, in terms of the Cambodia and US diet, Cambodian needs to deal with, for example, the human rights, violation, abusive, something like that.
Do you think, Alex, that there's always been a gap between the elite, Cambodia's elite, and the people? Is it? There have been some recent surveys which show that Cambodian perception, feelings towards China have lessened, and then there's more support now for the US.
I think, Hugh Manette's not only having a West Point degree, an NYU master's, and a Bristol PhD, that is a lot of experience in Western countries, right? So him knowing the West helps. Yes, you are right. There always is a gap between the citizens and the leaders, particularly in systems that have autocratic tendencies, right? Southeast Asia, the IC Southeast Asia report talks about the perception of China. It's not that great, so there always is. So I'm sure there is a movement towards that, but it really depends on how responsive the government is to the desires of the public opinion as well, right? So, but just to piggyback on what Ronan is saying is that it is a time that you don't put your eggs in one basket. Economically or security-wise, because the demand on Cambodia is a lot. It's a developing country with very limited resources, and just imagine if a natural disaster should occur, and oftentimes the military is called to do the, HADR responses, humanitarian assistance and disaster response. If you don't have that resources, what can you do? It makes the country very, very vulnerable. It makes the government very vulnerable.
Okay, you mentioned economic issues. Cambodian Senate President Hun Sen traveled to Beijing on December 3rd to meet with Xi Jinping. Both sides committed to deepen bilateral cooperation, strengthen party-to-party ties. In a social media post, Hun shared that he had requested more Chinese grants and concessional loans to encourage investment. And in 2 visits in the second half of 2023 by his son Hun Manet, a total of 23 agreements were signed, including 8 for Belt and Road initiatives. China is Cambodia's biggest creditor and has poured billions of dollars into infrastructure investments under Hun Sen's leadership. Some of the biggest Chinese-funded projects include a $2 billion expressway between Phnom Penh and Sihanoukville and the $1.1 billion Siem Reap Angkor International Airport, which opened last year. Now, according to Reuters, Cambodia's current debt has reached $11.6 billion. Ronan, let me ask you, and yet, according to another Reuters report, it was the same Reuters report, they believe that there has been a freeze in Chinese funding. They're citing that in 2023, the last loan was for $212 million, and there have been no further loans as of September 2024. Is there any substance to this?
Yeah, so number one, we have to understand that Cambodia is deeply financially reliant on China. Why do we say that? Because over 40% of Cambodia's external debt owed to Beijing, right? Number one. Number two, China basically has some gigantic investment projects, ranging from different industry to different industries. So Cambodia is relying on Chinese funding for economic growth. Right, so that's the point number one. Cambodia being heavily reliant financially on China. Number two, you brought up the question regarding the China pose, right? They basically, a loan was approved previously, but now they are not going to be delivered to Cambodia on time. Why? Basically, it shows Beijing's dissatisfaction of Cambodia's side, pay the debt on time, because number one, Cambodia's economic performance has not been really robust recently. Number two, Beijing or China itself is facing very serious domestic economic pressure. So it cannot just spending money.
Alex, how willing and how able is Cambodia to diversify beyond China? We painted that situation where it's heavily indebted and reliant. We talked about different industries. There's gas, solar, wind, rail, road, bridges.
The interesting thing is the question that you asked is willing and able, right? It may be willing, but it's unable to, And Ronan just mentioned it. Because if you think of it as a purely economic transaction and a financial transaction, if I'm from a creditor perspective, I'm a creditor giving you money, first of all, can you tell me what the conditions of those situations are? If I pour that money in it, can I get it back? Exactly what China's finding now, right? Because money doesn't grow on trees, and that is a very, very big, I think it wants to, but it's limited by the fact that what type of creditors are willing to extend loans considering that your economic performance is not great.
But it also raises, this is why we have the issue of debt trap diplomacy, which is pointed at China. Well, we'll have to end it there. Thank you so much, Alex Tan and Ronan Fu, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.